If you unmute yourself, you can ask your question.
Hello there, just a couple of quickies. It is not appropriate to have residential units above a venue, especially one that's open 7 days a week and early evenings because of the noise complaints, etc. And then also, it's not in keeping with a conservation area. Why not start with what is in keeping and design from there? And we've got the point where is what do the community need to be provided? Then you cost and design it back from there. The City of London land that sits outside is for the occasional use of the community and it's not to be used as a resident's backyard. And what have the Corporation of London said on this? And the final thing is considering the Ernst & Young statement they made the other week about the 60 bricks, which has been loaned large amounts of taxpayers' money, are operating without any democratic oversight at all.
Thanks, Stuart. Thank you. I'm going to bring in, well, whoever from the panel wants to pick up those 4 issues, but I think they're 4 pretty clear issues. So perhaps Councillor Middy, you might want to come in first, or...
Well, shall I start with the 60 Bricks point? So yeah. 60 Bricks is an independent company within the council. It's wholly owned by the council, and there is democratic oversight of the council through its shareholder committee in which councillors sit. So there is full democratic accountability of 60 Bricks. However, it is in legal terms an independent company, although wholly owned by the council.
Okay. And then can somebody pick up on the City of London land and what consultation has been undertaken with the City of London, what they've had to say about this development? Perhaps Joe, you might wish to come in, or some member of the team.
Yeah, I can pick that up, Ollie, and I'll pick up the other couple of questions as well. So in terms of the compatibility of of an active ground floor with residential above, that's quite standard in modern design, and the final design will be subject to very thorough acoustic tests and reports which will need to satisfy the planners and will be conditioned as part of any future planning permission. In terms of the impact on forest land, the council has an ongoing dialogue with the City of London Corporation and the conservators. We actually look at this development as an opportunity to invest in the forest land through both direct investment through the landscaping proposals that Simon Parry took you through, and also should the development proceed and get planning permission, it would have to make a contribution to investing in Epping Forest itself. The final point was about the development not being in keeping with the conservation area. Just like with the acoustic considerations, for any design to get planning permission, there'll need to be further engagement with the planners and the conservation officers, and the design will need to satisfy planning and conservation officers that it enhances the conservation area and preserves the important aspects about it.
That's something that's come up quite a lot. So it might be worth elaborating on how exactly has the conservation area informed the design as it currently sits, because we've had a lot of questions from people saying that it doesn't feel like it's in keeping in character. How can a 5-storey building be in keeping with, North Chingford conservation area? That's one of the questions that's been put. So I'd like a response from somebody in the project team for that, please.
I think so. If we could perhaps bring Phil Catchside in from the architects.
Hi, Phil. Do you just want to introduce yourself so that people know who you are?
Hello, Phil Catchside, the partner at Hawkins Brown Architects. And I just try and I think 2 parts to that question. In keeping in terms of potentially mass and height, and also maybe your question is relating to architectural detail materials. So I think when we've been considering massing, and we've showed a taller building there previously, which was our brief, we have tried to make sure, or try to make the massing distribution of the massing on the site respond very carefully to immediate adjacent buildings and land, principally the, for example, Carver's Cottage, but also the green itself. So we have tried to sculpt the massing or the building there in a way that's respectful, or trying to be respectful to the conservation area and particular elements of it. But also we've got to try and enhance it. The test is, do we enhance it? So we think we've done that in a sort of medium scale by moving parts of the building around so that we have elements which are lower against lower buildings adjacent, and where there are no immediate adjacent lower buildings, that's where some of the height is. So that's how we've tried to make the building massing respond and in fact enhance the conservation area. Now, the enhancing part comes from things like having active frontage all around, making more use of the space in front of the building, etc. That sort of approach we've taken. In terms of the materials and maybe the architectural detail, the slides have shown we first looked at other buildings in the area, and there are quite substantial buildings, and they tend to be community buildings and religious buildings, churches. There's quite a few of those around. And we took, bear in mind, this is very early stage, these are concept designs, try to take some direct reference of materials used in the surrounding buildings. And in that case, we've taken brick as the primary material.
Phil, you're breaking up. You're breaking up, I'm afraid. So I'm going to bring in another resident. So I'm going to mute you because you're breaking up. Alan White's hand up. I'm going to allow you to talk. So if you unmute yourself, you're good to go.
Thank you very much. As I've indicated in the, I think Phil is still.
Yeah, he's sort of, yeah, apologies. I think there's a brief technical issue here. Hopefully he'll finish. There we go. Oh, no, perhaps not. Phil, if you can hear me, stop talking.
Surrounding.
Right.
Okay, Alan, sorry about that. The floor is yours.
Perfectly okay. As I've indicated in the chat, I actually support this development. I think it's regrettable to see so much negativity being expressed around it, quite frankly. There is this sense about as though what some people would like to do is preserve the area in aspic. And it seems to me, again, as I said in the chat, one of the aspects of conservation is enhancement. And it seems to me that what is being proposed now is an enhancement on what is currently there. I think it's good that the council have responded to the concerns of residents, for example, the reduction in the height of the building. One very specific point I just want to make is in one of the first slides, there were three photos or three illustrations. One had the inside of the library. There seemed to be a lot of dead space above the storage for books. The storage seemed to come up to about chest height, and then there were just blank walls above it. That seems to me to be a lot of dead space.
Okay, perhaps Aidan, you might want to pick this particular subject up. I'm just trying to find the visual that you might be referring to, Alan. Bear with me if I share my screen again. Was this the document you were referring to? This slide you were, which? Yeah, okay.
The one on the bottom right.
This one here.
Yep. So that one there, that's the children's library. So we're limited to space. We're limited to height there, just because of the little tackers being able to sort of browse books there essentially. So the rest of the library is quite a bit higher, but that is the children's library that's in the picture.
Okay, that makes sense now.
Yep.
Thank you.
No worries.
Okay, great. Then we'll move back to participants in that case. So the next person I have is Brian. Bear with me, Brian, and I will just bring you into allow you to talk. So Brian, if you unmute yourself, you should be able to ask your question.
Yep.
We can hear you.
Yes, hello there. Good afternoon. Yes, from what I can see in terms of what has been presented, it still seems to be, except for a minor modification, a take it or leave it scheme as far as residents are concerned. In my understanding, because I think there's been a certain amount of ingenuousness in relation to what is taking place, because from what I understand is that the rebuild of the library and the assembly in terms of the facility put in its place is conditional upon the number of residential units that are put above. Little has been said about that, or the need actually for that, and I'm really quite surprised about that, because it looks as though the library has come first, and the residential space is secondary to that. And I think in terms of finance, my understanding is that it's really the exact reverse. Now, the reason I mention that is that it doesn't seem as though any other alternative has been looked at. The council obviously has given a brief to the architects, and the architects have worked as best they can to that brief. But the point I've tried to make previously when I have engaged with this is that, and others as well, from what I believe, is that there are intermediate solutions. Beyond that of just simply reducing the facility by a floor, there's a possibility, or there are varying possibilities of varying degrees of refurbishment and rebuild with either no residential units or many less residential units. And alternative sources of finance could also be sought, heritage finance, crowdfunding, or whatever else. That hasn't been presented to us that all avenues have been explored. As I say, it does seem to be that the council has moved with a fairly fixed view of what residents will have, with very little modification beyond that, and have continued to run with it, rather than giving a range of alternatives. And I think that's really unhelpful. I mean, even in terms of pricing, what was mentioned before to one of the other residents, a dismissing of the issue of pricing. It may well be that current facilities are not amenable to what the council can afford, but I haven't heard anything said about varying kind of pricing regimes have been attempted, and these have been the outcomes, and they still haven't covered costs. So what I would still plead for is that other alternatives are investigated in terms of design, more intermediate, less imposing, and I would say upsetting as far as the aesthetics of the area are concerned, that particular heritage site. Just to say that, just lastly, that unfortunately I do feel the design is, I'm sure the best efforts as far as the architects are concerned, but is fairly undistinguished, even in terms of modernist design. I don't mind a modernist design, but this does fall below the pale. It does seem to me this is fairly undistinguished aesthetically.
Okay, Brian, I think that you're on the record now with that, so thank you very much. We'll ask probably Joe and maybe Councillor Mir as well. What other alternatives have been looked at?
Well, should we start with? If I start, Ollie, then I'll hand over to Joe. So the starting point has always been that what is needed is decent library facilities, new community facilities, particularly also investment in Station Road in order to help sustain the high street there. There is not budget for a new library to be provided in any other way other than through enabling housing development. And we've always been very, very clear and upfront about this. So the only way we are able to deliver on this is through the enabling housing development. But saying, well, in which case don't build housing, doesn't address the fact that, as I set out right at the beginning, there is an increasing cost to the existing buildings, both in terms of maintenance and structural condition, that will have to be met. as well as also an inflexibility of use that means it cannot be used as effectively to deliver council services as people frankly deserve. Now, we have looked at a range of potential options. I mean, if you look at the government's levelling up agenda, it's very clear that heritage monies are not available for big parts of London currently. That money is going to the north of England, and probably quite rightly so, to address long-standing deficits there. We have looked at refurbishment as an option. The amount of money that is available for potential refurbishment doesn't do much more than repaint that library, even though it is quite a significant sum of money, does not deal with issues around accessibility, which are issues in law, as well as around the rights of people with disabilities to be able to access all parts of that building as they should be able to. I'm going to pass over to Joe to talk to that refurbishment point and the budget that was potentially available around that and what that would have done.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. So in the Libraries Capital Programme, there's a sum of 617,000 allocated for works to Chingford Library. As Councillor Miller said, that sum would allow some modest internal redecoration of the facility, but it wouldn't go any way to addressing accessibility issues. So the first floor of the building would still remain inaccessible to people with mobility issues, and it wouldn't address any of the accessibility problems of the assembly hall at all. We did do, as part of this project, an assessment of what it would cost to remodel the buildings to make them more flexible, DDA compliant, and also to address M&E issues, and the cost for that was just over £5.5 million. So the only way to get the new modern facilities that are shown on the image here is through a full rebuilding scheme, and the only way to fund it is via residential development. In terms of heritage funding, notwithstanding the levelling up agenda, this building in historic England's view wouldn't be eligible for heritage funding. It's not listed, and so there are very, very limited funding options other than a full rebuild of the facility.
Okay, thank you. I might get criticised for asking my own question, but I promise this is informed by several that have come through. Why is a cafe being proposed in this facility, given the number of cafes that exist within the local area? Do we want something here that's going to compete with other businesses locally? What's the rationale for having that in this space?
So partly to encourage council usage of the library space. It's to enable people to use library facilities, watch their kids and have a coffee. It's to encourage usage of that side of Station Road where there are far, far fewer cafes. I think the experience of regeneration shows that where it is successful, it's because a deeply experiential high street is created, and that means choice and it means competition in that high street. When you look at where high streets have thrived locally, including in outer suburban settings, looking at Wanstead High Street, looking at Southgate, looking as well at High Street and Walthamstow Village, it is because there is a real variety in choice. That's what drives footfall, that's what drives business to those cafes. At the moment, given the number of unoccupied units on Station Road, there's clearly something more that needs to be done to bring people in, because what is there at the moment isn't working. We don't see this cafe as posing any sort of existential threat to existing businesses on that high street. We see it as a good thing that will help encourage greater use of the library site itself, help activate that corner of the green, help regenerate the wider area, and act as a draw for new business for existing businesses on Station Road and the green area.
Okay, I'll move back to public questions. Yvonne, I'm going to bring you in. Yeah, you're straight on the unmute button. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. I have a number of questions. One is relating to the architect's concept designs that they've shown us. They give a very, very misleading impression of what the building will look like from any angle on the green or from Station Road, because they borrow the landscape. The design where you're looking at the building from the front, you'd have to be on the far side of Station Road to have the building that distance away from you. So and the one down the green and the one looking at from the back, it gives a very, very misleading impression of the size, the height, and the impact of the building on the landscape. And I would very much appreciate it if more realistic drawings could be done to reflect that. In relation to the cafe, I disagree with Councillor Miller intensely on this issue. We have several very well-loved cafes in Station Road, a matter of a few minutes walk away. The space would be far better used, instead of as a cafe, to provide an increased sized kitchen and an increased sized multi-use community space. The current community space that is proposed is 140 people in an audience format. In a table format, it's 100 people with no stage, with no dance floor area. So for weddings, family celebrations, even quiz nights, it is not adequate for most of the events that the current space would be used for now if it were affordable. So why is the council insisting that, despite nearly everybody who they have consulted saying we do not want this cafe, why are they persisting in requesting it? And in relation to the costings for refurbishment, pardon me, I submitted an FOI request to get a breakdown of the 5.3 million the council stated that it would cost to refurbish the existing building, and they refused on the grounds of commercial incompetence. Now, how can it be commercial incompetence if they have dismissed it out of hand and say they will not proceed with it? How is it going to, you know, spoil any future bids that the council might have, because another project would be totally different? So I reported it to the Information Commissioner's office, and they are investigating, but unfortunately it's going to take them some time to come back because they've got a backlog of other queries. The kitchen would be totally inadequate for a wedding reception. If for having a wedding reception for 100 guests, you need the space to plate up the food in order to be able to serve it in a reasonable amount of time. So a small kitchenette does not cut the mustard for this kind of function. The only kind of functions you're going to be able to put on in that sized space would be a meeting. You wouldn't be able to have dramas portrayed in there, because even if you had, as was suggested at one point, a portable stage, where would that be stored? How much space would that take up in there, well, if it's going to be stored in that space? And then how much room would there be for seating once the stage was erected? Any drama organisation wants to make or cover their costs at least by selling the tickets for the seats for their production. The community space is just not adequate at all.
Yvonne, is it okay if I'm just gonna thank you. I'm gonna open the 4 points that you've raised to panelists to see who wants to come in, and then we'll move on to another one. But I will bring you back in if we do have some more time. So whoever wants to pick up, I think maybe we take the first item first around the inadequacy of the facilities proposed in terms of the various different uses. Who wants to pick that point up?
So I think let's be clear. This is an opinion. I think that the space that's provided is an adequate space. It's been modelled to be a really good space that can be widely used. There's a series of assumptions that were made in what Yvonne said, which absolutely she's right to raise her views. I'm not disputing that. But the whole purpose of having a flexible space that can be increased in size is so that it can have that multitude of different uses. There will be, and I think we're making assumptions just because it is a kitchenette area that it couldn't be used to cater for a wedding. That, again, is a view. The whole point about this design is that it can have that multiplicity of uses. Yvonne may beg to differ. That is absolutely her right, and we'll continue to listen. There were, I think, a number of other points. I don't see why anyone would stop using those existing cafes. I really like Helen's on the Green. I've been there multiple times. I know it very well. Just because another cafe opens here, I think that makes assumptions that demand is fixed. It clearly is not fixed. And in building new homes on this site, we will be creating new demand, as well as demand for people who currently use the library service, but then don't visit the cafes because we're on the other side of the road, because that is the time they're spending with their children. So I think it's wrong to approach this with fixed assumptions about what the design may appear to say, because that is how we believe it can be used. It has been designed, and I think Simon can talk to this in a second, as a multi-use space that can be used for a whole variety of different events, from dance clubs through to weddings, through to small meetings, and be flexible in that.
Okay, Simon Parry, do you want to come in on that issue, but also...
Sorry, Ali, and just to pick up a point that's just been made, it will have a demountable stage and a dance floor. These are points that have been made now, I think, 3 times over the course of this evening. So just to make this absolutely clear, it will have a demountable stage, it will have a dance floor, in order that it can be used for that multiplicity of purposes.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. That was a point I was also going to make. We've also got the gallery areas on the first floor. We've got the divisible space on the first floor, all sorts of areas that you could have meetings, student education on the first floor. We've looked at the different types of flooring, as Councillor Miller mentioned, for the Assembly Hall. We've looked at providing areas on the ground floor for the children's library. We've listened to a number of people and their comments. We've tried to incorporate them within the scheme, and this is really just, again, these are early designs, and as the detailed fit out is looked at, how you can use various different methods to divide the area, it will be looked at. There's an interesting comment about the children's play area and how we can look at that we could look at different ways you can fit that out. Again, on the first floor, we'd people looking at providing computerized areas. There's all sorts of ways you can create divisible areas within this building. We've provided an area also for local community radio, which was again requested. So we are trying to listen to people. It is, not everyone will agree with what we're doing, but we are trying to take on board people's comments and follow through on that basis. The detailed design is yet to happen, and we will continue to keep on listening, and we will work with our colleagues both at the council and listen to people's as part of the Q&As on this, and try and integrate as we move forward.
Simon, can I also just pick up a point that's not been covered that Yvonne did raise, which is around misleading impressions being given by the imagery? Is there more imagery coming forward as a part of this moving forwards, or the images you've shown now the images that you're effectively standing by?
I'll probably hand that to the Phil Catch side on Nick Gaskell, because they actually provided the images, but I think that they're taken from some secure sources from Ordnance Survey. So I'll ask them to perhaps answer that. Either Phil or Nick, if you can come in on that one, please.
Yeah, it's Phil Catch here. My videos doesn't seem to work at the moment, so just have to make do with the voice.
That's fine.
The first thing is that these are sketch visuals. They're artist's impression. And we've used the tools at our disposal, three-dimensional maps that we've been using to try and generate a variety of views. And in this presentation, there are 2 types. One is a sort of further away view. I think we used to show 6 and 5 stories generally, and others are closer in, trying to show a bit of material and detail. And we've tried to give a reasonable picture of the building in the round. Capturing any building exactly as you see it is quite difficult, and but generally what would happen later in the next stages as part of the planning application process, or the consultation with the planning officers but also public, would be verified views. And verified views are where specialists can match views with particular camera lenses and then show the buildings as they would appear as more closely to what would be experienced, so that process would follow. We haven't deliberately tried to mislead anybody with our visuals, but we've been trying to show elements of the scheme from a variety of angles to explain the scheme. So we will take that away and make sure that we are comfortable that we're giving a reasonable impression of the building, but we think we have to date, but we obviously don't want to ignore that comment. So if that's the impression that's given, so we will review that with the team generally.
Okay, thanks, Phil. And I think Yvonne's last point around FOI and the costings for refurbishment is placed firmly on the record, and it sounds like that's a process that will run its course. So I think we should move on to the next person. Kathy, I'm going to bring you in and allow you to talk. If you unmute yourself, you have the floor. Here you go, Kathy, you have the floor.
Thanks. You say that you've looked at the surrounding buildings, the height of the surrounding buildings. None of them are more than 3 stories high. So even 5 stories, I would say, is too high. I agree that the current building is not a good looking building, but the new building doesn't look any better. But inside, it's a very well designed space. It's a very flexible space, and the current hall is is big, and it cannot be smaller, because I've been to many events there and it's been full and it's spread out into the lounge, which is why it's flexible. You can pull the doors back, extend the size of the lounge, and you've got a much bigger area. Anything smaller will not be fit for purpose. And I notice it says 140 seats. We can get 90 seats in Mornington Hall, which is a tiny hall. So how small is this hall? A big thing I want to ask is, I've heard over the last few years, people working for the water board said they cannot keep supplying the water demands to North Chingford. In fact, we do get our water cut off more and more regularly now. And they said that the council has to help them put a new supply into North Chingford to provide water for this area. They said it's a big problem at the moment. And there's another thing I want to go on about the cafe. We've had the cafe there. They tried it temporarily in the coffee lounge. Nobody used it. And all the cafes locally are well used. There's loads of cafes and people have their favourites. I cannot see, unless you're going to charge really cheap prices, why anyone would want to use it. And I said what is needed is a big kitchen for the assembly hall, because I said that is used a lot, because anyone who's having a function will want to prepare food, will want to serve tea and coffee. They don't want to go out to a separate lounge to pay extra for tea and coffee, because some of the events that we provided in the assembly hall, tea and coffee was included and you just dished it up. You don't want to have to do it separately. You want the tea and the coffee to be with the assembly hall, provided by the users. We don't need a coffee lounge. There is no point in having it, and it did not work last time they tried it. Okay, and I said I said the water board is, again, and the electricity board, both of them have complained, because I know people work.
So, Councillor Miller, do you want to take on the point around the electricity and the water board and capacity and infrastructure? Joe, as well, you can come in and broach that particular topic.
So with all development, these discussions with utility companies, with electricity, with water, they happen. There has to be surety of supply, otherwise these things don't go ahead. And it may mean that as a consequence of this development going in, there will be some changes to investment in the water and electricity supply locally to ensure that it can be supplied. This is part and parcel of the planning process. Of what happens with all development of any size, that you have to make sure there is surety of supply. So that will happen. I think the cafe point we've answered. We know that cafes have worked really well in our library spaces and have been very successful. They help generate additional footfall. They haven't, where they have been open, abstracted business from other local businesses, and we're confident of that.
Okay, I'm going to bring in another individual. Marjorie, I'm bringing you in to talk. If you unmute, you have the floor.
Thank you. Yes, I've got a few points to make, but I'll try to be very succinct if I can. First of all, it's a very square, very uninteresting building. Giffords down the road have put on flats above what was the old bakery and have made a very attractive roof, which is in keeping with the rest of the road, and it looks very nice. Can something not be done to soften the outline of this new building, which is going to look, quite frankly, just like a huge box? There seems to be an awful lot of wasted space at ground level by bits of architecture that look to be unnecessary. And the main point I wanted to make is that in previous years, we two local societies put on amateur productions of musicals with costumes, lighting, orchestras, very successfully, to full houses, giving the council a very, very nice a way of getting money. But unfortunately, they priced us out, so we had to leave. There was consultation in 2004-05 where they were going to be building a new assembly hall and new library. £500,000 was wasted on feasibility studies for a project that never came off the ground. And that's the reason why the assembly hall has been underused since then. The new assembly hall under these designs will certainly not be able to sustain theatrical performances, which are desperately needed in this area. We have no theatre. We haven't had theatre for years, apart from KDOS, who are doing a fantastic job in Mornington Hall. There is no opportunity for anybody else to perform. So, you know, I'm not happy about this this development. And a further point is, who on earth is going to want to buy a flat that has no parking? Our daughter is house hunting at the moment, and we wouldn't even consider a place that didn't have parking. You have got to understand that cars are here to stay. People are not going to give up their cars for public transport. People have disabilities that are not necessarily bad enough to have disabled badges. And so they're not going to be able to use public transport. They will need their cars. And if you are trying to put 40 flats on with 4 car parking spaces, you will never sell those flats.
Okay, Marjorie, thank you very, very much. I'm going to bring in the various members of the panel to respond to each of the points that you've made and ask a question off the back of that in terms of what opportunities residents are going to have to sort of feedback in terms of these questions about facilities that have been raised tonight. So there have been some, I think, constructive suggestions. What's the process through which people can feed those into the project team moving forwards? But let's first address Marjorie's points, and perhaps Councillor Miller, you might want to take up that last one around parking.
So whenever council brings forward a development, we do a strategic housing marketing assessment. We look at the market, what people will buy, what people will want to rent. And whilst it may be true that residents who currently live in Chingford will want car parking spaces, there will be people needing homes who live in the wider Waltham Forest area who would happily move to Chingford and also take a flat that doesn't have parking attached to it. That's the experience of where flats have been built and homes have been built in each and every other part of the borough. So this isn't about taking people's cars away from them. Very much that is not the case. This is about a new development that will, as we have said, it will have a minimum of 4 blue badge parking bays. We're looking at other potential options. We're going to do that transport assessment. But just because this development may be, in the most part, car free or have less parking than is typical in the Chingford area, it doesn't mean that there is not demand for this type of property. And it doesn't mean that people won't be able to live there very effectively, using that town centre, using local amenity, and making good use of public transport.
Thank you. And does anybody else want to come in on the other points that were raised in Marjorie's intervention? Perhaps Joe, you might want to, or Simon, in terms of the type of space, and actually in terms of the building. I think Giffords down the road was mentioned as an example of good architecture. What's the process for people feeding into the development of the design moving forwards?
Thanks, Oliver. So today's session is very much part of that process. So very helpful comments, which will be, well, the architects are here on the call, and they'll be factored in should the scheme progress to detailed design, if Cabinet approves it to go to that next stage. Just touching on the sales values, 60 bricks, as well as doing its internal valuations, it also appoints external valuers to inform its viability appraisals. And the advice that has come back is very much that flats in this development will be in demand, and we wouldn't be proposing to proceed with the project unless we'd had that confirmation and external validation, as well as 60 Bricks colleagues saying that yes, they think this will be a very attractive development to segments of the market, people looking for a new home.
Okay, thank you. We've got about 10 minutes left, and we've still got quite a few hands up, so we'll get through them as quickly as possible. Sharon, you now have the floor. And if you unmute yourself, yeah.
Yeah, I have. Thank you very much. Hi, yeah. So I have a few questions, but I suppose some of the things I want to know is how many jobs, if any, do you think you might envisage this might actually help and bring to the area? And I wanted a clearer idea of how you envisage the whole sort of making a profit, you know, and in what kind of timeline. I take on board the matter of the 103. It's been used 103 times within 2019, which basically does equate to 1/3 of the year. So it'd be good to get an idea of how you think that that uptake would be like, and whether that would go well beyond 50%. I'd be interested to know that. I'm really keen on young people and what we can provide for them. And I mean between 11 and 18, I think they fall through the cracks quite a lot. And so what I've heard quite a lot of is use for adults and older adults, and also for very young kids. So I'd like to know just a little bit more about the radio studio, which I think is a really positive thing. I take on board what someone said about use of the assembly hall and the kitchen. And I think, you know, weddings and things like that, it's good to have this multi-use. So it's just maybe if there's any sort of flexibility to look at that. I still have concerns about the cafes, because Helen's on the Green, Dada, Wake Up, which is a new business, they are all within very, very close proximity. They're not far away. So it does need to be considered. And I would ask, given the space that this cafe looks like it's got, I mean, I don't know, so I'm asking a question genuinely, would they be paying business rates according to their space, and so that they wouldn't at least there'd be some form of competition that's not sort of pro this site and to the detriment of others? Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think the first question was how many jobs will this bring to the area, this particular site? Is there a figure that the team have on jobs?
So we did do some modelling. We know it will bring jobs both in construction, both in what is there afterwards. I can't remember the exact figure. We're very happy to have that shared, though. So I think we've obviously got the list, contact details for everyone who has joined, so we can provide that without problem.
And then in terms of the timeline to profitability for the space, to how, and how what's the model in terms of increasing the uptake? What does the usage need to be in order to make this a sustainable facility moving forwards?
So the usage assumptions are at an early stage, because we're at an early stage of the project, but the intention is very much to have usage throughout the day, and by having flexible space, so some smaller spaces, larger spaces, they can be used and let to a much wider variety of groups than the current assembly hall, which is one single large space. But as Councillor Miller mentioned earlier, the intention is to have that real variety of uses, so rental levels can be kept as low as possible and on a cost recovery basis, but the bar will be lower and the rents will be lower because they'll be used throughout the day rather than just 103 times a year. And that was on 103 occasions. So even on days where the assembly hall was being used, there'll be a large amount of hours during those days where it wasn't being used. And in the new facility, we very much not want that to be the case. We want it to be used by a range of groups, different parts of the community throughout the day and evening.
And Joe, can you just talk a little bit to Sharon's point about the radio studio, what the provision is for and how that's come about?
Yeah, thanks, Oliver. That was we, as part of the engagement process that Councillor Miller referred to earlier, we set up a community panel, and the idea for an area for radio, community radio, was a suggestion from one of the members of the community panel, which will be taking up in detail proposals about having a space for community radio. There's also a question about engaging young people and those that are aged 11 to 18, and that we went to scrutiny committee at the council last week, and that was another of the suggestions there. And there'll be a proposal in the report to cabinet that, should the project proceed to the next stage, we have a very focused engagement strategy around those aged 11 to 18.
Thanks, Joe. Okay, we've got 5 minutes left, so I'm going to bring in I think Catherine, you can now unmute yourself.
Hello there.
Hi.
Hi. Obviously, I put my hand up a long time ago, and some questions have already come up.
No problem.
A couple of quick points. The GP surgery proposal, I note there's only 3 parking spaces, and I do wonder if this is just a hook, how serious it really is, because 3 parking spaces is very small, and as other people have said, the council has mentioned this sort of thing before in other developments and it hasn't gone ahead. So how serious is that? I think it would be, the other thing is, I just want to say about the kitchen and the cafe area again. I agree with everything everybody's said. And my strong suggestion is that you consider putting the kitchen next to the assembly hall. It could perhaps be in a position so it can serve different, but it can serve the assembly hall primarily. So you've got it there for functions and weddings and other things. But you have a relaxed seating area where you've currently got the cafe area, and people can bring in drinks from the neighbouring cafes and bring their own drinks. But you keep the kitchen area for the events and maybe to service meetings in the rest of the building or something like that.
Okay, Catherine, we've heard that loud and clear, so thank you very much. Can I ask the question then that was posed? How serious is the GP surgery proposal, given what Catherine's just said?
So it's a very serious proposal. It's not entirely within our gift because it's for the local NHS, so the Care and Commissioning Group, as it stands, to bring that forward. But we are very keen to do this. We've done this on other developments, including in Sutherland Grove, where a new health hub is about to open, as part of our development at St James Street, which is a council-owned development with brand new health hub there. It's a key part of the development that we're bringing forward on the Score Centre side at Coronation Square in Leighton. It's what we're looking to bring forward in Leewich. We've got a really good record now of good collaborative working with the CCG to bring forward new and additional healthcare provision. But it would obviously be up to the CCG to decide that they want to do that, depending on local healthcare need.
Okay.
So we think it's right. We think it's justified by the demand. We think it's what is needed. But ultimately, it's for another organisation to deliver on that. But we are going to do all we can to make sure that happens, and we have that good working relationship in place.
Okay, great. And what Catherine said about the kitchen and cafe spaces, I presume something that the team can look at and will comment back on in due course.
Indeed.
I think what's going to be probably going to be our last question is from Philip. Philip, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I'm a latecomer, so problems with the PC. First off, and you may have done this earlier, I'll make it a quick question. How much higher is this development going to be, higher than the flats that are opposite? How many feet, or in old money, or meters, please? The other thing is regarding the parking. Am I correct in saying people that buy flats there will not be allowed to have cars? And if they can have cars, when we go electric, where do they go along to get them charged? Because most of us will have them charged in front of our houses. The other question is the cafe. Is this going to be in private hands, or is it going to be owned and run by the council? And last but one is the toilets. It's interesting that the toilets have been closed down for ages. So when you go on the green, You can't, there's nowhere to go to the toilet. If the restaurants are closed, for example, as they have been in lockdown, and I think Sunday afternoons, and people got nowhere to go to the toilet. Is there anything going to be done about that? And my last observation really is I went to the church meeting where the amount of animosity locally was really high towards this. And I'm quite surprised there are a number of people who are saying they think this is a wonderful thing for the area. I can't work out what it's going to give us extra that we haven't got, but okay, there's people that support it. Now, once you've actually got the final proposals, why don't you do a survey of the people that live in the area? You did a survey on the going down the Ridgeway on the right turn. You did a survey to ask people whether they like the idea of a right turn, and apparently the majority said no.
I'm really sorry to interject, but I think we've got, you know, clear questions there that I think the team can answer. So probably that last one first, in terms of why not just conduct a survey. There's been a suggestion of a vote, of a poll on the chat as well. Why not just do that on this development?
So I think the starting point is this about how we re-provide a library, which is what we've always said. We've got to address the material condition of the existing building. It's also about how we deliver on statutory services. So there are a whole series of obligations on the council as part of this. This isn't just about polling or a plebiscite. There's a whole series of other considerations that are going to be fed into the decision as to whether to proceed with this or not. But the reason why we are holding these meetings is because we do want to take account of people's views. But we also need to make sure that whatever happens here, we are providing for people who may not be as confident as some of the residents here are in coming forward, in giving their views and having their voices heard, particularly people who are dependent on council services.
Okay, great. And then so can somebody quickly pick up the question about toilet provision as well locally? Toilets locally are being closed down. Is that something that's going to be addressed through this development?
So toilets will be part of the development. Obviously, there's an assembly hall, there's a library, there's a cafe, so there has to legally be a toilet. They will be open to, the library will be open. And if the library is open, the toilets will be open as part of that.
And then on the cafe, is that something that's going to be council owned or privately run?
So the model where we've had cafes in libraries is that they are run through the library service as part of the suite of services they offer. No decision has been taken yet, but my assumption would be that we would replicate that model in the Chingford Hub as well.
And then just as it through, is there provision for electric charging points at some point in some place in this development?
So provision of electric charging points, absolutely key to all new development. It's how we meet our obligations to our green obligations. And as we said a number of times over the course of this presentation, this is a concept design. The exact detail will be worked out. My assumption is, and my expectation is, that there would be EV charging points as part of this development, or as a contribution the development makes to the local community, there would be EV charging points potentially installed at other places locally.
Okay, and then the last question that Philip asked was...
I think so all of the on-site car parking spaces would have electric charging points.
Okay. And then, Joe, maybe this is one for you, which was Philip's first question, and the final one for this evening is how much higher is what's being proposed here compared to the flats opposite?
So there's a slide in the presentation that shows the height of the building compared to a number of adjacent properties.
Apologies, this one here.
Yes, and it's probably better if Phil from the architects is brought in to talk through it, because it's quite a technical exercise the way the heights are taken. But we'd be happy to send this slide and indeed all of the presentation with a response to that question to Alan following the meeting. If because I recognise we are sort of 3 minutes over time.
Yeah, Phil, I'll bring you in for a very brief intervention if you want to. Otherwise, we'll wrap proceedings up.
Yeah, I think firstly, just making sure we understand the question, which opposite, assuming that means south of Station Road, or does it mean to the east? That might be helpful to clarify. And then you can see here the visual of a three-dimensional model, which shows with reasonable accuracy what's there at the moment. What we have at the moment is, in terms of the design, a concept design. So in some ways, we can only give a broad answer to that question. We don't have the final design, so the slide underneath is meant to capture that. If we can understand exactly, we can produce more a detailed response to an answer, I suppose.
Okay, I'm sure Philip will follow up on that one. So I'm going to draw proceedings to a close now, and just to say that I think Ben Terry, I'm going to bring you in very briefly just to understand how residents, or perhaps Joe yourself, how residents can get in touch with the project team moving forwards, notwithstanding the fact that we'll collect all of the Q&As that haven't been answered and any of the questions that have appeared in the chat, and I presume the project team will be responding to those.
Yes, so we have a dedicated Chingford Hub email address, which is chingfordhub@walthamforest.gov.uk, and if people Google Chingford Hub, it will call up the council's webpage, and that email address is on the webpage, so people can click through, and Ben and other members of the project team monitor that email address and will answer any questions received.
Okay, thank you. Well, I will then bring proceedings to a conclusion then for this evening. So thanks to everybody that's attended. I think we've had some points close to 150 people in situ. So thank you to everybody that's spent their evening with us tonight. And that's the end of the presentation. So thank you.